So a few years ago, I had the privilege of helping facilitate a dialogue between 300 union leaders from all across New York State. And when you're facilitating a dialogue of over 300 people, there are a lot of logistical challenges to consider. In this case, it was how do we operate a meeting using Robert's rules and enforce transparency in a group of kind of grisly union employees. And my really small role in that process was to manage one of the microphones, one of 6 microphones where people could come up, practice their concerns with me. The delegate could, practice what they wanted to say, and then they could, then I would turn on their microphone so that they could share with the broader community and, bring their business to the floor. And everything was going along pretty well. It was a group of pretty amazing professional people getting a lot of work done. And then all of a sudden an agenda item came up that sort of instantly turned the room from the equivalent of like professionals doing business to something like a speakeasy bare knuckle boxing match. Like instantly I feel a presence over my shoulder. And when I say a presence, it's still not clear to me today whether that presence that I felt was like the really bushy Fu Manchu or like the very 6-foot-tall person that it was attached to. But regardless, someone was in my space bubble, and very immediately I felt like my size and my femaleness were just like all liabilities in this situation. And so I turned around and I said, "How can I help you?" And he said, "Turn my microphone on," meaning that he wanted me to turn his microphone on, out of order, and then basically allow him to interrupt the meeting because he wanted to shout at the speaker. And so I was like, no. And he offered me so much consideration and grace in the form of attempting to reach over me and slap at the soundboard in an attempt to reach the on switch of the microphone. And, kind of in this moment of like, how the heck am I going to calm this person who's so much bigger than me? I like felt really deeply as if every like Italian grandma in my lineage who had like ever reached for a wooden spoon like came alive within me, and I offered him my most like terrifying shout whisper, and I was like, "I am your union sister, and you will speak to me with respect." And he, blinked approximately 17 times before literally like backing away. And I was like really grateful to have him out of my space and really glad that it had gone, with the least amount of trauma possible. But definitely was feeling my nerves on edge. And then later that day, when the meeting had closed and business was done and we were all gonna sit down to a meal, he approached me and said, "I chose your microphone because I thought I could walk all over you, but you taught me that I'm somebody that I want to be fighting next to." And I gave him my very best business lady who's very serious about life handshake, and I made eye contact, and I made him break it first, and then then I went to the bathroom and literally cried for 15 minutes. But I first learned the lesson that my size and my femaleness were going to be liabilities when I was in 2nd grade. And I told my teacher that I wanted to be a priest when I grew up, and she said, "Oh, girls can't do that." And I have been hearing lessons like that, and I'm sure that every woman in this room can report the same, since so early. And when I thought about this topic of game, I really, my mind mapping exercise touched topics like "you've got game," or bring your A game, or wear your game face. And like those things resonated with me so little. Like when the Final Four was happening, I had to like check in with friends and like make sure what sport it was so that I didn't say something stupid. I just like, I don't really, those narratives don't resonate with me. And like at a towering 5'2" with more freckles than an Ann Geddes picture, like I generally don't feel like in a room, I'm the person that you think of as, you know, bringing their A game. And definitely nobody's imposing figure who like looks like they're wheeling and dealing. So with all those narratives in place, when 6 years ago I had the chance to begin consulting, I did what anybody in that situation would do, feeling all of those things from all of those years, and I very promptly took a very secure job in state government where I could sit at the same desk for approximately 30 years and accomplish nothing. I was making really good money and I had incredible benefits, like I could go get acupuncture if I wanted, and it was like amazing for so many ways, but I also knew what it meant to have a productive hour from all of this time in the nonprofit world. And I knew that I was living 40 hours a week without ever touching that level of productivity or affecting change with issues that mattered to me. So what wound up happening is that all these free nights and weekends that I had from all of this nonprofit work I was no longer doing that I hadn't had in a decade, I began filling with the same. I started volunteering on boards and I started consulting with organizations. And the trouble was that I wasn't getting like paid for any of that. So I was, you know, working this really secure job during the day, and then I had like my Superman identity. I would clock out at 4:30 and like jump into a phone booth and come out and be like, oh, now I'm a board member, and get all this stuff done. But it was exhausting because it turns out that like even though I was still like, you know, internally an honor student with high functioning ADHD, there were still only 24 hours in every day. And so I quickly began to feel exhausted and burnt out, and it became obvious to me that I was going to have to make a decision about who I wanted to be, where I wanted to go, what I wanted to accomplish. And so in December of 2013, I made the decision that I was going to head back into the nonprofit world. And that was a really big jump. I had to leave a lot of security to do that. And my thinking was that there are these organizations who are doing important social work and they are impacting causes that really matter. But they tend to be founded by people who are, you know, doctors or social workers or teachers or lawyers, and none of those people happen to like accidentally get a master's in nonprofit administration before they started doing that work that they were highly skilled in doing. So my thinking was that I could be the person that empowers them to handle those aspects. So things like marketing, strategic planning, graphic design, those things were absent from their skill set, and it would hamper their organization's long-term health for sometimes decades. And I would find organizations who, you know, had really not found a way to meaningfully communicate with volunteers or donors just because they hadn't like taken the time to think about their marketing strategy ever, or who like hobbled along with a mission statement that didn't quite make sense for 25 years and it had begun to impact their relationship with funders. So my thinking was I could build this team that could handle all of those things for nonprofits or other social change organizations like political campaigns or social entrepreneurships, so that they could liberate founders to do the work that they came into the space to do. And I started doing that in December of 2013. And then by April, I was working 60 and 70-hour weeks. I had really fallen into this market hole that I couldn't quite have ever anticipated. But by June, all of my bills were coming in pink envelopes because it turns out that no matter how good you are at your job, if you forget to bill and invoice your clients and do that accurately, you really will absolutely flounder running your own business. And so I kind of began to, you know, dig into my skill set and like think about my philosophy, and I realized that in all of my relationships with my clients, I was encouraging them to consider this theory of leadership called strengths-based leadership, which essentially invited them to view their strengths as assets that could advance their organization without feeling that their weaknesses were liabilities, but rather opportunities to build a team that was differently skilled than they were. So, I was encouraging all of these founders to embrace this and say, like, okay, you can't do marketing. Please put the Photoshop down and come over here and we'll help. And, that was something that I was very comfortable advocating for them, but I hadn't started thinking about City of Light that way yet. And what happened was that I needed to. I was at this place where I wasn't going to make it through if I didn't. So on my administrative coordinator's first day, I was working on human trafficking in a post-Soviet nation, and this client that I was working with was attempting to send out as many grant applications as possible before their country was literally closing the door to foreign funding coming in. It was kind of an authoritarian leader who was closing the doors to foreign funding to kind of maintain influence over this issue, and so we were just banging out grant applications, doing as many deadlines as we could. But another thing that I was doing at the same time was that I was bottle feeding a sick foster kitten. And so I was spending all this time at my keyboard doing these international Skype calls, and then I would have this 6-week-old kitten meowing in my lap and needing to be bottle fed. So my admin shows up, and the first thing that I say to him is, if you do nothing but hold this kitten all day, you will have earned every penny I ever spent on you. And he stayed after that. And it turned out that not only was he really good at taking care of needy kittens, but he was also really great at remembering to invoice clients and reminding me the value of one of my hours and encouraging me to consider that the good that we created was actually more significant than what we were charging. And he also did something really, really important, which was to invite me to consider the idea that there might be times that our work life might not accommodate the addition of a whiny foster cat. And that was the first time that I'd really said, there are moments that I can say no, and that was such an invitation to me. So I began to understand the value of team in a different way when I applied it to myself. And today, City of Light is a team of 6 collaborators. We're a multidisciplinary team. We wrap around clients to handle issues starting from strategy and then building outwards to marketing and approach and infrastructure development and intervention design. And we wrap around clients in moments of crisis, and we leave them when they're stable. And working with that team of differently able, differently skilled people has been one of the most challenging and valuable experiences of my entire life, because I have to communicate across skill sets and across differences in opinion. And Abraham Lincoln said this thing about wanting to found a cabinet of rivals. I find that it's difficult enough to talk to people who have the exact same mission and focus as you, but just exist in a completely different skill set and space. But it is an amazing thing, and the results that we experience doing that are just so remarkable. So it's absolutely worth it. There's this podcast that everybody's listening to these days from the entrepreneurial world called How I Built This, and I've listened to it a few times. There's some really great folks on there, the founders of Airbnb, a lot of companies that you hear and interact with every day have offered their thoughts. But I have a big problem with How I Built This. And the problem that I have is that I don't think eyes build things. I feel like if you're I and you're approaching this and you're building, the bottom line is that you're short-sighted. Your skill set is limited. Your strengths are limited. And in reality, eyes don't build. Eyes, they might vision, but it's the team they build around them. We, though, are infinite. We can build a team that can do incredible things and have the capacity to do remarkable good in the world. And that is absolutely the thought that City of Light was founded with. And we want to be able to partner with and be the we that helps organizations succeed. And I think that there are people across Buffalo and across the world that would attest that. And it is difficult, but the research shows that teams that are diverse, that operate in skill sets that are completely different than one another, that arrive from different education levels, that are racially diverse, that are gender diverse, that those teams, they devise more creative solutions. They are, they're more profitable companies. They grow more stably and they increase their profit margins at a higher and more stable rate. The research is vastly in support of this, but it is very difficult. We want to build teams with people with whom we communicate easily. And so we exist in this tension of, you know, you're saying this thing and it means something different to me and it kind of hurt me a little. And it's very tough. We swim in this tension to get work done. But it does amazing things. And it's important to City of Light that we live in that tension, because when we show up to work, orphans in Rwanda who are disabled are able to have access to wheelchairs that they may not have otherwise had. And children living in domestic violence shelters have books that they wouldn't have had access to. And kids in the city of Buffalo are going to have access to yoga that they might not have otherwise been able to attend. And vital, vital things happen because we showed up to work and we lived in that tension. And so I want to share a couple of the keys to communicating in that space so that you can really operate on this principle of like team and game and like live in it. And the first one is communicating. And the second one is communicating. And then the third one is it's also communicating. But the sub steps inside of that are going to be apologizing and thank you notes and workflow charts and task management software and just I statements and being able to be the person who comes into the room and says like, I feel this way today, and that authenticity just like helping you ride through these problems, because it doesn't happen another way. There's no other way to embrace that diverse team and really get this stuff done without being the most amazing communicator you can be. So I want to invite you to consider that there is an incredible capacity for good in a group like this that gathers with your incredibly diverse skill sets and your ability to dream and imagine and get together and talk to one another, but that absolutely none of you will be the game player or like bringing your A game on your own. You might have lived with a sense for a long time that you're not enough. And the bottom line is that while you have intrinsic worth and value and you are incredibly gifted and skilled and you are an important force in the world, you're not enough. But we are enough, and we can do incredible things when we work together and dream together. And I just want to invite you to carry that with you. And for what it's worth, Buffalo, I believe in you.